Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be covering an animal AI system. This is the first episode, so we're just going to be covering the very basics. As you can see, we got animals wandering around across our terrain, then they'll take a little break and then choose a new random spot to move to and go again. In future episodes, we'll be covering stuff like predators and prey, feeding and eating different foods, and interacting with the player in certain ways. Maybe you can kill an animal to get some food or some resources. Here we are in a brand new scene, and the first thing we're going to do is set up the terrain and import the required library. So if you go to your window and click on Package Manager, should be Packages and you're under Unity Registry. You're going to want to come up into this corner and just type in AI, and you'll see AI Navigation. I'm going to go ahead and install this. The reason for this is it has the Navmesh components that we need to use for our AI. It'll allow us to select certain points and move our animals to those points, stuff like that. Just makes it really simple. So after installing that, you're then going to want to go ahead and create a brand new terrain. So I'm going to go 3D object, terrain, and to this terrain, I'm adding a Navmesh surface. So add that component there, and you'll see we have a bunch of variables and stuff like that. You can ignore most of these, it won't really matter. Depends on what you're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and just make my terrain look a little bit more interesting, and I'll come back right. So we are back in my scene. As you can see, I just edited the terrain slightly, made it a little bit more interesting, and added a quick texture. Coming back to your Navmesh surface, there's one thing you need to do, and it might take a minute or two, but you need to come down here and click bake. And this will just bake our middle area so that we can like navigate our animals across this surface. So after baking it, you should see this little AI navigation thing pop up, and you can click show Navmesh to see what our walkable area is. There are certain things you can set up to make it so steeper slopes are inaccessible to animals. If you add certain objects, stuff like that, that you don't want the animals to be able to walk through, you can go ahead and add a Navmesh obstacle to those objects. So let's say we have a cube here. We don't want anyone to be able to walk through it. We just add that Navmesh obstacle, and this will act like a box collider for the Navmesh agents, which is what our animals will be using. So you would want to add that to anything like trees and rocks, so on. But for me, I've not got any of that, so this is perfect, just ready to go. So one last thing I'm going to do, so I'm going to come down to our surface here and just set up a little cube that I'm going to be using for my animals. This is just going to be a sheep, so I'm going to call it a sheep. I'm going to remove the box collider. You can keep it on there, but I don't have no need for it. And we're adding a Navmesh agent. I'm going to reset my rotation on this cube. So I'm going to go ahead and actually create a brand new model for this animal that we're setting up here because I want it to be a sheep. So the first thing I'm going to do is just click off mesh renderer. I'm actually just going to remove the mesh renderer and the cube filter. Right click, I'm going to create an empty object, click model. I'm then going to right click inside of my model and create another white cube, shrink it down a little bit, just like so, and then create a little face by duplicating it, just like this. And I'm going to apply this a black material. And close enough, looks like sheep. That'll do just fine. So back on our Navmesh agent here, what you're going to want to do is come to this stopping distance. And I like to set this up a little bit to something like 3. And then we're going to go ahead and add a new script by clicking add component new script. And we're just going to call this script animal. So now I'm going to open up my animal script and we're going to get started. So here we are in our animal script, and the very first thing I want to do is import a new library. So we're going to type in using Unity Engine.ai, and this is going to import our Navmesh components and other stuff like that and allow us to actually use those in our script. We're then going to want to create a public enum, and we're going to call this animal state because we're going to be using state machines to control the behavior of our animal. So I'm just going to type in idle and moving because these are the only two that we're setting up in today's episode. And one last thing we're going to want to do above our class is actually require component type of, and then inside here, we're just typing Navmesh agent. And this is just to ensure that we always have an Navmesh agent attached to any animals that we're trying to create, just to avoid some potential issues. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete these two void start and void update. And I'm going to just set up some variables. So this first one is going to be controlling our wander state. So you're going to want to create a public float. We're going to call this first one the wander distance. In default, this would be about 50 meters. This is going to be how far the animal can actually move in one go. Then you're going to want to create a public float walk speed. And I'm going to set this to be about 5. This is how fast your animal will actually move around. And finally, we're just going to create a max walk time. A public float max walk time. And this is going to be equal to maybe 6 seconds. This is just how far your animal can move before taking a break and going back to its idle state. Beneath this, we're then going to create a new header, and we're going to call this our idle. And this is going to have a public float idle time in it. And idle time will be how long the animal actually takes a pause or a break for before it then continues to wander again. Beneath this, we're then going to create a protected Navmesh agent. And the reason we're doing a protected Navmesh agent is because in the future, we're going to want to separate our animals into different types like predator and prey. So we're using this as a sort of base class to base our predator and our prey scripts off of. So we're just going to do protected Navmesh agent with a lowercase n. And then we're going to do protected animal state. And we're going to call this our current state and equal this to be animal state idle, like so. We're going to go ahead and create a void start, private void start, and we're going to call a function we're about to create called initialize animal. So now what we're going to want to do is actually create this initialize animal function. So coming beneath our void start, we're going to create a protected virtual void, and this is our initialize animal function. So navmesh agent equals get component navmesh agent. Then beneath this, you're going to want to go navmesh agent speed, which is the one we just got. Navmesh agent speed is equal to walk speed. So essentially what we're doing here is just grabbing the required components off of our game object and just setting up the variables within that. Beneath this, we're just going to go and make sure that current state is equal to the animal state idle. And then beneath this, we're going to call an update state function, which again, we're going to have to create in a moment. So beneath this, we're going to go ahead and create our update state function. So we're going to do, again, protected virtual void and call this update state. Then we're going to go ahead and create a switch for our enum. Call this our current state, case, animal state, idle. And then beneath this, you're going to want to type in handle idle state. This is going to be, again, another function that doesn't exist yet. And then we'll break out this. Once more, we're going to do case, animal state, moving, handle moving state. So again, another function doesn't exist. And then we'll finally break out this. Sorry, I forgot to put my colon on the end of that. But these two functions obviously don't actually exist yet. So what we're going to do is just create 2 more protected virtual voids. This is our handle idle state. And we're just going to copy and paste this. And change this to be our handle moving state. So we're going to set these 2 functions up in just a moment. But the first thing we're going to want to do is actually create a function to choose a random point nearby the animal that the animal can actually move towards. So we're going to create a protected vector3 get random nav mesh position. And this is going to take in a vector3 called origin, as well as a float called distance. So what we're going to be doing in this function is we're going to create a vector3 point that our animal can move to within its current position and the distance given to it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is obviously create a vector3. So we're going to call this vector3 random direction is equal to random.inside unit sphere times distance, like so. This is going to create a random point within the specified sphere. This sphere has a radius of 1, and we're just timesing it by distance to give it a larger radius to pick from. Then we're going to take our random direction variable, and we're going to just do random direction plus equals origin. so it starts from its origin position. Then finally, we're going to do navmesh hit and call this our navmesh hit. That's it for these variables. We're then going to start some proper code. So the first thing we're going to do is try and find a valid position on the navmesh. So we're going to do an if navmesh dot sample position, and the sample position is going to allow us to actually double check that we are allowed to move towards this position from where we currently are, or where the animal currently is. So we're typing in random direction, comma, out navmesh hit, and distance, and finally we're just doing navmesh dot all areas. Then we're just going to do return navmesh hit dot position. So if we can move towards this position, we will return the navmesh hit position that we have created. That's what we do. If we cannot move to the position that we've tried to move to, we're going to recall this get random navmesh position from within the function. We're just going to return get navmesh position or get random navmesh position and just type in origin and distance. So in other words, we're just retrying recursively until we get a valid position to move to. Now we're going to move on to our handle idle state. So the way we're going to handle our idle states and our moving states and stuff like that is with IEnumerators, which is a coroutine which will allow us to do things like waiting for a certain number of seconds before we do a certain behavior. This will just make it easier. It will also mean that we don't have to use an update, so it will be better in terms of performance for our animals. So what we're going to do is type in start coroutine, and we're going to call a function called wait to move. We're then going to come beneath this and create a private IEnumerator and call this wait to move, which is the function we just started here. What we're going to do in here is create a random wait time. So float, we're going to call this wait time is equal to random range, or random dot range rather. Open this up. We're going to do our idle time, which is the variable we created up here, which is currently set to be 5 seconds. We are then going to divide this by 2, then do comma and idle time times 2. This will just give our animals a bit of a more random movement. If we have like 5 animals starting at the same time, it might be nice for them to start moving at different times just to create a more realistic environment. Then we're going to do something which is yield return new, wait for seconds, and then pass in this float that we just created called wait time inside of some brackets. This is essentially just going to wait for whatever this is. So if it's about 5 seconds on average, it will wait for 5 seconds, then it will continue the code. So whatever we put down here will happen after wait time has been elapsed. So what we're doing here is vector 3, and we're going to call this our random destination. And we're going to equal this to get random navmesh position. For our origin, we're passing in transform.position, and for our distance, we're passing in our wander distance variable. So this is essentially getting a random position using the function we created earlier. After waiting, which is our idle state, we're now moving towards our moving state. So we're getting our random position. Then we're going to do navmesh agent dot set destination, open bracket, and we're going to type in random destination, which is the variable we just created. So what this is doing is grabbing our navmesh agent from our animal and giving it the destination to move towards. And the navmesh agent will take care of everything else. It will take care of avoiding obstacles, stuff like that. It will just try its best to move towards that position. We're then going to call another function here. I'm going to do 2 little lines just because this function doesn't exist yet and we're not going to create it for a while. So it's set state, open bracket, animal state dot moving. So this is going to be used to set our state to a new, or set our current state to the moving state. But the first thing I wanted to do is actually set up our handle moving state as well. So again, in this one, we're doing another coroutine. So start coroutine, and then we're going to just call this our wait to reach destination. And this is all we're doing in our handle moving state function. We're then going to create another private IEnumerator and call this wait to reach destination. And all we're doing in here is making sure that we have reached our destination before we go back to our idle state. So the first thing you want to do is type in float start time is equal to time.time. This is going to record the current time in the game to ensure that we can break out of our movement if we haven't reached our destination within the time frame specified by our max walk time. So we're going to do while navmesh agent dot remaining distance is bigger than navmesh agent dot stopping distance. We're going to do yield return null. So what this basically means is every time we get to this point, without meeting these requirements where we are close enough to actually move to our idle state, we're going to loop back around, and we're just going to keep waiting and checking. And once we finally have reached the destination that our animal is moving to, we can run some other code. There's one thing we're going to want to do above our yield return null though, which is actually double check that the time that has elapsed since we started walking hasn't gone above our max walk time. So to do this, we're going to just do if time.time minus start time is smaller or equal, or sorry, bigger or equal to max walk time. We're going to open this up. We're then going to just do navmesh agent dot reset path. Then we're going to do set state, which is again the function we haven't created yet. So again, I'm going to put 2 lines in front of this. Set state animal state dot idle. And finally, we're just going to do a yield break. So what this is doing essentially is making sure that the time that we've been moving for hasn't gone above our max walk time. If it has, we're going to reset the navmesh agent's path so it'll stop moving, set the state back to idle, and break out of this enumerator. One last thing you're going to want to do here is underneath our while, we're just going to again set our state back to the idle. So we can just copy and paste this with the 2 lines in front. This basically means that our destination has been reached. So if you want to do anything specific when your destination has been reached by the animal, you can do it there. Now we're almost done, but obviously we still have these set state functions that are not being called. So I'm going to go ahead and create a protected void and call this set state. And inside this, we're going to take an animal state and just call this new state. And we're going to open this up. Inside of here, we're going to do if current state is equal to new state, or equal to new state, we are then going to return. So we're going to break out of this function. Otherwise, we're just going to do current state is equal to new state. And then we're going to call a function called on state changed. And we're passing in new state. On state change is the final function that we're going to be creating today. So again, we're going to do a protected virtual void and on state changed. And this is again going to take in an animal state called new state. And what we're going to do inside of here is just call our update state function, which is the switch that we created up here. The reason we've got it set up like this is if you want to have specific things that happen when your state changes, like animation changes and stuff like that, we can do that within here. However, I recommend waiting for the next episode where we split this animal into prey and predator, because we will actually be overriding certain functions to have different behaviors based on the animal. For now, however, we're just going to come up here and get rid of these comments on our set states. And that should be it in terms of the programming today. Coming back to our scene here, we're going to select our sheep with our navmesh agent and our animal script already added. We're going to set up our variables. Obviously, I've set mine up how I like them, but if you want your animals to be able to move further, have a longer max walk time, different speed, and so on, you can do that here. Idle time just means how long it's going to wait for, so we're going to set this to be about 3 seconds, just so we can get a better feel for what's going on. And I'm going to go ahead and click play. As you can see, our sheep will snap down onto the terrain. That's controlled by our navmesh agent. And if you select the sheep, you can actually see its destination, where it's going, and stuff like that. You can see our animal is now in its idle state. It will wait for 3 seconds. Once those 3 seconds are up, it will pick a new position to move towards. And there it goes. So that is everything for today's episode. I hope you have enjoyed. In future episodes, we'll be covering stuff like rotating the models to fit the terrain and a bunch of other stuff like that. So please stick around, make sure you subscribe, and leave a comment if you've enjoyed. Thank you so much.